king pointed a blade. Choose a sister to save. My decision would cost blood. The blade's edge pressed against Elena's throat, drawing a thin line of crimson that matched the fury in King Velthan's amber eyes. The Zephyrian throne room stretched endlessly around us, its obsidian walls carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering light of energy torches. The alien king's blue skin appeared almost black in the shadows, his 7-foot frame radiating menace as he held my sister captive with one massive hand. "Choose, human," Velthan commanded, his voice a rumble that echoed through the cavernous chamber. "Which sister dies for your species' insult to our honor?" Arya stood 20 feet away, equally trapped in Captain Jorik's iron grip, her military training evident in the way she held herself despite the ceremonial dagger poised at her jugular. Blood already stained her diplomatic uniform where she'd fought their initial capture. Her green eyes met mine across the throne room floor, steady and unafraid. My breath caught as I looked between them. Elena, brilliant and analytical, who'd spent years studying Zephyrian culture in preparation for this first contact. Arya, fierce and protective, who'd insisted on joining the mission despite my protests. Both of them here because I'd believed diplomacy could bridge the gap between our species. The diplomatic reception had started promisingly enough. The Zephyrians had welcomed our delegation with ceremony and ritual, their blue-skinned nobility arranged in perfect formation around the crystalline dais. I delivered Earth's formal greeting according to every protocol Elena had briefed me on, offering gifts that represented humanity's greatest achievements. Then everything went wrong. "Your gift of music was meant to honor us," King Velthan continued, his golden crown catching the torchlight as he tilted his head. "Instead, you presented sounds of war and conquest, battle hymns and marching songs." I struggled against the guards holding my arms, their grip like steel bands around my biceps. The classical pieces we'd chosen were meant to showcase human artistry, but I was beginning to understand how they might have been interpreted differently by a warrior culture. "Your Majesty, there was no intent to—" Silence. The blade pressed deeper against Elena's skin, and she gasped. "Your words have already proven worthless. Now you will prove your worth through action. Choose which sister survives, and we will know if humans understand true sacrifice." My gaze swept the assembled court, dozens of blue faces watching with predatory interest. Their golden eyes glowed in the dim light, beautiful and terrible. One figure in particular drew my attention, a young Zephyrian woman standing near the king's throne, her white hair flowing like silk over armored shoulders. Unlike the others, she didn't look eager for blood. Her expression held something else entirely as she watched me struggle with the choice. "I won't choose," I said, my voice cutting through the chamber's oppressive silence. King Velthan's lips curled into what might have been a smile on a human face. On his alien features, it looked purely predatory. "Then both die." "No." I straightened despite the guard's grip, meeting the king's burning gaze. "You want to test human honor? Fine, but not like this." The white-haired woman stepped forward slightly, her hand moving to rest on the pommel of her own weapon. The gesture was subtle, but I caught the way her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly. "You speak of sacrifice and honor," I continued, forcing steel into my voice. "In my culture, a true warrior doesn't hide behind the blood of innocents. If you want to judge humanity's worth, judge me." Something shifted in King Velthan's expression. The blade remained steady at Elena's throat, but his amber eyes narrowed with what looked like curiosity. "Explain yourself, human." "Single combat," I said, the words coming faster now as the plan crystallized in my mind. "You and me. If I win, my sisters go free and Earth gets the alliance we came here to negotiate. If you win—" I let the implication hang in the air. The king's courtiers began murmuring among themselves, their musical language creating a susurrus of sound that filled the chamber. "If I win," Velthan said slowly, "all 3 of you die, but your deaths will have meaning and your species will be remembered as one that understood honor even in failure." The white-haired woman's eyes widened, and she took another step closer to the throne. This time, her movement was noticed. Several guards turned toward her, hands moving to weapons. But she ignored them, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. Adrian, no, Elena whispered, her scholar's mind already calculating odds. You can't win against him. Maybe not, I admitted, never breaking eye contact with the alien king, but I'd rather die fighting than live knowing I chose which of my sisters to sacrifice. King Valthon studied me for a long moment, his massive chest rising and falling with each breath. The energy torches cast dancing shadows across his blue features, making him look like some ancient god of war. Finally, he nodded once. You surprise me, human Adrian Cross? He knew my name, of course he did. This entire scenario had been planned from the moment we'd arrived. Very well, you will have your combat. The blade disappeared from Elena's throat with fluid grace, and she stumbled forward, gasping. Arya was released a moment later, both sisters rushing to my side despite the guard's warning gestures. The trial will commence at dawn, Valthon declared, his voice booming through the chamber. Until then, you will be our guests. As the guards prepared to escort us from the throne room, the white-haired woman caught my eye one final time. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, she pressed her hand against her chest, over her heart, in what could only be described as a salute. Or perhaps something more. The massive doors sealed behind us with a sound like thunder, leaving us in the hands of our captors. But as we were led through corridors lined with alien artworks and trophies of war, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was only beginning. And somewhere in the depths of that alien palace, a white-haired princess was planning something that would change everything. The cell they placed us in was luxurious by prison standards, carved from obsidian but softened with silk hangings and cushions in deep purples and golds. Energy crystals provided gentle illumination, casting everything in warm amber light. You're insane, Arya said the moment the guards sealed us inside. She paced like a caged predator, her military bearing intact despite the circumstances. Valthon is 7 feet tall and built like a tank. Elena sat cross-legged on a cushion, pulling out the tablet she'd managed to keep during capture. Her fingers flew across the screen. Arya's right, she said without looking up. Zephyrian combat traditions emphasize strength and endurance. Their physiology gives them natural advantages: denser muscle mass, reinforced bone structure, enhanced reflexes. I leaned against the wall, feeling cool stone through my diplomatic jacket. The formal clothing felt wrong now, too restrictive. So what would you have had me do? I asked. Choose between you? Both sisters fell silent. Arya stopped pacing, her shoulders sagging. Elena's fingers paused over her tablet. No, Arya said finally, but there might have been another way. The time for diplomacy ended when they put blades to your throats. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, and a wall section slid aside. I tensed, expecting guards, but instead a single figure stepped through. The white-haired woman from the throne room, now wearing form-fitting dark armor that accentuated every curve. Up close, her beauty was striking. High cheekbones, full lips, and golden eyes that seemed to glow. You should not be here, she said, her accent making the words musical. Elena scrambled to her feet, tablet clutched to her chest. Arya moved to flank me, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Who are you? I asked. The woman glanced toward the sealed entrance, then moved deeper into the chamber. Her movements were fluid, predatory grace wrapped in feminine form. Someone who believes your species deserves better than execution, she said. I am Zara. Just Zara. No title, but the way she carried herself spoke of nobility. You're here to help us escape, Arya said. Zara's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Escape would mean war between our peoples. Your deaths in honorable combat might serve a different purpose. Honorable deaths, Elena repeated. How comforting. You misunderstand, Zara said, turning to face me directly. I am here to ensure the combat is truly honorable, that you have a genuine chance. She moved to the chamber's center, her presence making the spacious room feel smaller. The scent of alien flowers and something uniquely her filled the air. Zephyrian combat follows ancient forms, she continued, but those forms have variations, if you are willing to learn. You'd train me, I said. Why? Those golden eyes met mine, and I saw something vulnerable beneath her composure. Because your choice in the throne room was unexpected. We have a saying, true strength protects all, or protects nothing. You chose to protect all. Arya snorted. He chose suicide. Perhaps, Zara acknowledged, but he chose it for the right reasons. She began moving around the chamber's perimeter, armor catching the crystal light. Remove your jacket, she commanded, and your shirt. Excuse me? Elena said, eyebrows shooting up. Zara paused, tilting her head. I must assess his physiology. Human strengths differ from ours. If he is to have any chance tomorrow, I need to understand what I am working with. Heat rose in my cheeks, but I began unfastening my jacket. As I peeled off the layers, Zara's gaze tracked every movement with clinical intensity. Interesting, she murmured as I stood bare-chested in the amber light. Your muscle density is lower than ours, but your flexibility appears greater. And these scars? Her fingers traced a line across my ribs, where shrapnel had found me during military service. The touch sent electricity through my nervous system. You have fought before, she observed. Different kind of fighting. Perhaps, but pain is universal, and you have learned to function despite it. She circled me slowly, her assessment thorough, but there was something else in her examination, a warmth that had nothing to do with medical necessity. Your stance is too rigid, she said finally. Zephyrian combat flows like water, then strikes like lightning. You must learn to bend. What followed was unlike any training I'd experienced. Zara moved through combat forms with lethal beauty, her body a weapon wrapped in silk and steel. She guided my movements with gentle corrections, her hands adjusting my posture with touches that lingered. Feel the rhythm, she whispered, standing close enough that her breath warmed my ear. Combat is a dance between opponents. You must learn the steps. Elena and Arya watched from the cushions, expressions ranging from fascination to concern. But I found myself lost in the alien woman's presence, in the way she moved like poetry written in violence. Again, Zara commanded after I stumbled through a defensive sequence. But this time, trust your instincts, not your training. My training kept me alive in 3 wars. Your training fights humans, she corrected. Tomorrow you face something else entirely. As hours passed, my movements began to flow naturally. Zara's coaching grew more intimate, her corrections becoming caresses that made my pulse race. When she demonstrated a grappling technique, her body pressed against mine with deliberate pressure. You learn quickly, she breathed against my neck, for a human. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Her laugh was like silver bells. From a Zephyrian, it is the highest praise. As dawn approached, exhaustion weighed on my shoulders. But something else had grown between us during those hours, a connection that transcended species, a tension that had everything to do with the way she looked at me when my sisters weren't watching. Rest now, Zara said finally, stepping back, but her eyes remained fixed on mine. You will need your strength. As she moved toward the hidden exit, I caught her arm. Her skin was warm beneath my palm. Why are you really doing this? I asked. For a moment, her composed mask slipped, revealing something raw beneath. Because when I watched you refuse to choose, she said quietly, I saw something I had never seen before, something worth preserving. Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of alien flowers and the memory of her touch burning against my skin. Dawn came too soon, heralded by resonant chimes that echoed through the palace corridors. The sound vibrated through the obsidian walls of our cell, pulling me from restless sleep filled with dreams of golden eyes and graceful movements. Elena and Arya were already awake, sitting together on the silk cushions, their faces etched with worry. Time to go, I said, rolling my shoulders to work out the stiffness. Zara's training had left me sore in places I'd forgotten existed, but also strangely confident. My body remembered her lessons, the fluid motions she'd drilled into me during those intimate hours. The guards arrived moments later, 4 towering Zephyrians in ceremonial armor that caught the crystal light like liquid metal. Captain Jorik led them, his scarred face impassive as he gestured for us to follow. Your king awaits, he said simply. The arena was unlike anything I'd imagined. Carved from living rock deep beneath the palace, it rose in terraced tiers that could hold thousands of spectators. Every seat was filled with blue-skinned nobles, their golden eyes glittering like stars in the dim light. Energy torches lined the walls, casting dancing shadows across ancient carvings that depicted legendary combats. At the arena's heart lay a circular platform of polished black stone, perhaps 50 feet across. Weapon racks stood at precise intervals around its perimeter, displaying blades, staffs, and implements I couldn't identify. The sight made my stomach clench with nervous energy. King Velthon occupied a throne carved from a single massive crystal, its faceted surface refracting light into rainbow patterns. He wore armor now, not the ceremonial robes of yesterday, but battle-tested plates that had seen real combat. Scars criscled his blue skin, telling stories of victories won and prices paid. But it was the figure standing beside his throne that made my breath catch. Zara, resplendent in armor that seemed crafted from starlight itself, her white hair braided with threads of gold. She didn't look at me as we were escorted to the platform's edge, but I caught the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers pressed against the crystal railing. Adrian Cross of Earth, Velthon's voice boomed across the arena, silencing the murmur of thousands. You stand accused of dishonoring our people through ignorance and arrogance. Do you accept trial by combat? I stepped forward, feeling the weight of alien eyes upon me. I do. Choose your weapon. The weapon racks held an array of deadly implements. Swords of various lengths and designs, staffs topped with energy crystals, curved blades that looked designed for a different anatomy entirely. I moved among them slowly, testing weight and balance as Zara had taught me. Remember, her voice whispered in my memory, choose what feels right, not what looks impressive. My hand closed around a simple straight sword, its blade perhaps 3 feet long. The metal was unfamiliar, lighter than steel, but with an edge that gleamed with unnatural sharpness. The grip felt perfect in my palm, as if it had been waiting for me. Velthon selected his own weapon, a massive 2-handed blade that would have required both my arms to lift effectively. The sight of it sent murmurs through the crowd, appreciation for their king's traditional choice. Combat begins when the crystal chimes, he announced, raising his sword in salute. It ends when one yields or dies. I returned the salute, my grip steady despite the thunder of my heartbeat. Across the arena, Elena covered her mouth with both hands while Arya stood rigid with barely controlled tension. The crystal chimed. Velthon moved like liquid lightning, his massive frame belying incredible speed. The great sword swept toward my head in an arc that would have decapitated me if I'd tried to block it directly. Instead, I flowed aside as Zara had taught me, letting the blade whistle past while I stepped into his guard. My counterstroke aimed for his ribs, but he twisted away with serpentine grace, bringing his pommel down toward my skull. I rolled backward, feeling displaced air ruffle my hair. Interesting, he rumbled, circling me with predatory patience. You fight like water. I had a good teacher. His golden eyes flicked briefly toward his daughter's position, and something like amusement crossed his features. Indeed. The next exchange was faster, more brutal. Velthon's blade carved through the air in complex patterns that spoke of decades of training. Each strike came from impossible angles, the great sword moving like a living thing in his massive hands. I gave ground steadily, relying on mobility and the lessons burned into my muscle memory. Duck under the horizontal sweep, sidestep the overhead chop, flow around the thrust like water around stone. You cannot run forever, human, Velthon called, pressing his attack. He was right. Already I could feel fatigue creeping into my limbs, while he seemed as fresh as when we'd started. I needed to change the dynamic somehow. The opportunity came when he overcommitted to a powerful downward strike. I stepped aside at the last instant, letting his blade ring against the stone platform, then grabbed his sword arm with both hands. For a moment we were locked together, his superior strength slowly forcing his blade toward my throat. I could smell alien sweat, see the calculating intelligence in his golden eyes. Clever, he admitted, but not enough. He twisted suddenly, breaking my grip and sending me stumbling. His follow-up strike would have ended the match, but muscle memory saved me. Without conscious thought, I executed the grappling counter Zara had demonstrated, using his momentum against him. My shoulder drove into his midsection as I pivoted, lifting and throwing with techniques that had nothing to do with weapons training. The alien king's eyes widened in surprise as he found himself airborne, crashing to the platform with bone-jarring impact. The arena fell silent. Veilthon rolled to his feet with fluid grace, but I saw respect kindle in his gaze. Now you show your true nature. Just getting started. What followed was unlike any combat I'd experienced. We moved around the platform in a deadly dance, testing each other's limits. Veilthon's raw power was overwhelming, but I had adaptability, unpredictability. Every time he thought he'd solved my patterns, I shifted to something else, human military techniques mixed with alien forms Zara had shown me. Blood flowed from a dozen minor cuts on both of us. My diplomatic clothes hung in tatters, while dents appeared in the king's ancient armor. The crowd's silence had given way to excited murmurs, then outright cheers as the combat reached levels of intensity they'd rarely witnessed. Then Veilthon made his mistake. Confident in his advantage, he attempted to end the match with a massive overhead blow that would have split me in half. I waited until the last possible moment, then stepped aside and grabbed his extended arm, using a throw that combined human leverage with Zephyrian flowing motion. This time, when the king hit the platform, my blade was at his throat before he could recover. The arena exploded into chaos. Thousands of voices rose in a cacophony of amazement, approval, and disbelief. A human had just defeated the Zephyrian king in single combat. But it was Zara's face that held my attention. Tears streaked down her blue cheeks, and her hands pressed against her heart in that gesture I was beginning to understand meant something profound in her culture. "Yield," I said quietly, my blade steady against Veilthon's neck. The king looked up at me for a long moment, something like pride flickering in his golden eyes. "I yield," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent arena. And in that moment of victory, I saw movement in the royal box that made my blood run cold. Lord Kethran, the war faction leader, was reaching for something concealed in his robes, something that glinted with the unmistakable sheen of an energy weapon pointed directly at Zara's back. "Zara, get down!" My warning shattered the arena's silence as I vaulted over the king's prone form. The energy weapon in Lord Kethran's hands discharged with a sound like tearing silk, its crimson beam carving through the space where Zara's head had been an instant before. Chaos erupted in the royal box. Nobles scattered as Kethran's supporters revealed themselves, more energy weapons appearing as if from nowhere. But my focus remained locked on Zara as she rolled behind the crystal throne, her armor sparking where the energy beam had grazed her shoulder. "Treachery!" King Veilthon's voice boomed as he surged to his feet, his ceremonial defeat forgotten in the face of genuine threat. "Kethran, you dare attack my daughter?" "Like, your daughter?" I stopped dead, the words hitting me like a physical blow. "Zara is your—" "Surprise," Zara called from behind the throne, her voice strained but alive. "I suppose formal introductions are overdue." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity, the way she'd known so much about the palace, her easy access to our cell, the deference the guards had shown her, even disguised. I'd been training with, falling for, Princess Zara Velthari. More energy beams lanced through the air, forcing me to dive for cover behind the weapon racks. Lord Kethran stood in the center of the royal box, like some ancient warlord, his scarred features twisted with fanatic conviction. "The human's victory proves nothing," he snarled, his weapon tracking toward me. "It merely shows how far our people have fallen when alien trickery can defeat Zephyrian strength." "Adrian showed honor," Veilthon countered, his massive frame shielding several cowering nobles. "He proved humanity's worth through combat." "He proved our weakness." Kethran's supporters moved to flank the loyal nobles, energy weapons creating a deadly standoff. We were meant to rule the stars, not bow to inferior species because they entertain us with crude cleverness. I edged closer to the throne, desperate to reach Zara. Blood seeped from her shoulder wound, staining her starlight armor. When our eyes met across the chaos, I saw pain there, not just physical, but the deeper ache of deception revealed. "Why didn't you tell me?" I called over the sound of energy fire. "Because you needed to choose me for who I was," she replied, wincing as she pressed against her wound. not for what I represented. Elena and Arya had taken shelter near the arena's edge, but I could see Kethren's soldiers moving to surround them. The war faction had planned this carefully. My victory was meant to be the catalyst for their coup, proof that Velthon's policies had weakened their people beyond redemption. Adrian Cross, Kethren's amplified voice echoed through the arena. "Your mongrel species has corrupted our royal bloodline. Princess Zara's interest in you will end our people's purity forever." Heat flooded my cheeks as the implications sank in. The war faction wasn't just opposed to human alliance, they saw my relationship with Zara as a threat to their entire genetic worldview. "Surrender now," Kethren continued, "and your sisters will die quickly. Resist, and we will take ours." Instead of surrendering, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I laughed. The sound carried across the arena, rich with genuine amusement. Kethren's weapon wavered, confusion replacing certainty on his scarred features. "You really don't understand humans at all, do you?" I called out, rising from cover with my hands visible but not empty. The ceremonial blade still gleamed in my grip. "You think threatening my family will make me surrender?" "It should, if you possess even primitive intelligence." "Maybe, but here's what you missed about human nature. We get really, really angry when someone threatens the people we love." I moved then, not toward Kethren, but toward his supporters in the stands. The first soldier tracking Elena never saw me coming. My blade found the gap in his armor with surgical precision, and his energy weapon clattered to the stone. "All units converge on the human," Kethren barked, but his carefully orchestrated coup was already unraveling. Because I wasn't the only one moving, Zara had emerged from behind the throne, her own weapon, a curved blade that seemed to be made of crystallized light, cutting through the air with deadly precision. Despite her wound, she fought with fluid grace that made my training session look like amateur hour. "For the crown!" Captain Jorik's voice roared from the arena entrance as loyal guards poured in, their arrival perfectly timed. But it was King Velthon who turned the tide. The massive alien king had retrieved his great sword and was carving through the rebel soldiers like an unstoppable force of nature. Each swing of his blade spoke of decades of experience, of battles won and enemies vanquished. "You forget, Kethran," he called across the melee. "I was fighting wars when you were still suckling at your mother's breast." The war faction's coordination collapsed as their leader's certainty crumbled. Soldiers threw down their weapons rather than face the king's wrath, while others fled toward the exits only to find them blocked by Captain Jorik's reinforcements. Within minutes, the rebellion was over. Kethran himself knelt in chains, his energy weapon shattered at his feet. Around the arena, the surviving nobles emerged from cover, their expressions ranging from shock to grudging admiration. "So," Zara said, approaching me with careful steps, her wound still bleeding, "now you know the truth. I am Princess Zara Velthari, heir to the Zephyrian Empire, and I have been deceiving you since the moment we met." I studied her face, still beautiful despite the pain and exhaustion, still alien despite the growing familiarity. The golden eyes that had haunted my dreams held uncertainty now, vulnerability that had nothing to do with her physical injury. "Actually," I said, reaching up to touch her uninjured cheek, "you've been showing me exactly who you are. The princess part is just a title." Her eyes widened and something like hope flickered in their depths. "Adrian," she whispered, leaning into my touch, "when I watched you refuse to choose between your sisters, I knew our peoples could find common ground. But when I trained with you, felt your dedication to protecting others even at cost to yourself, I began to hope for something more personal." More personal sounds good to me. King Velthon cleared his throat, a sound like distant thunder. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. We have diplomatic agreements to negotiate, and my daughter's wound requires attention." As we left the arena together, human diplomat, alien princess, and the king who had tested us both, I realized the real trial had never been about combat at all. It had been about choice, trust, and the courage to build something new from the ashes of old assumptions. And looking at Zara's face as she smiled despite her pain, I knew we had chosen well. 3 months later, I stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic station orbiting Zephyr Prime, watching the blue-white planet turn slowly beneath a canopy of foreign stars. The formal signing ceremony for the human Zephyrian alliance had concluded an hour ago, but I found myself reluctant to return to the celebration in the main hall. Having second thoughts about becoming humanity's first interstellar ambassador? Elena's voice came from behind me, accompanied by the soft whisper of silk against metal as she approached. I turned to find both my sisters looking remarkably different from the terrified diplomatic attachés who'd faced death in the throne room. Elena wore robes that blended human and Zephyrian design elements, her new role as cultural liaison having suited her scholarly nature perfectly. Arya's military uniform now bore insignia that marked her as liaison to the Zephyrian Defense Corps, a position that utilized her tactical mind and had earned her surprising respect among their warrior class. "No second thoughts," I said, accepting Elena's embrace, "just processing." "Processing the fact that you're about to marry an alien princess?" Arya asked with a grin that held only warmth now, the suspicion and worry of our first days replaced by genuine affection for Zara. "That's part of it." The sound of approaching footsteps made us turn. King Vaelthon strode onto the observation deck, his massive frame somehow managing to move with surprising grace in the station's lighter gravity. The ceremonial armor had been replaced with more practical diplomatic attire, but nothing could diminish the aura of power that surrounded him. "Adrian Cross," he said with formal precision that barely concealed his amusement. "My daughter requests your presence in the garden chamber, something about final preparations." "Tell her I'll be there in a moment." Vaelthon nodded, but didn't immediately leave. Instead, he moved to stand beside me at the observation window, his golden eyes reflecting the planet's light. "When I first pointed that blade at your sister's throat," he said quietly, "I expected you to choose quickly. Most species we've encountered make such decisions based on cold calculation, which individual serves their purposes best. And when I refused, I thought you were either remarkably stupid or remarkably brave. The combat trial was meant to determine which." His lips curved into what I'd learned was a Zephyrian expression of approval. "Your victory convinced me it was bravery. But watching you these past months, seeing how you've adapted to our ways while holding to your own principles, I believe it's something more." Elena squeezed my shoulder. "He's always been stubborn that way." "It's called integrity," Arya added loyally. Vaelthon's laugh rumbled through the observation deck. "Your species continues to surprise us, Adrian Cross. When Zara first reported her infiltration mission had been compromised by personal feelings, I feared our diplomatic initiative was doomed." "Infiltration mission?" I blinked, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed suddenly clicking into place. "She was supposed to be studying us?" "One of my sisters, yes. The real daughter of Lord Kethrin's lieutenant, who volunteered to pose as Elena Cross to observe human behavior under stress." Vaelthon's expression grew serious. "But when Zara saw you refuse an impossible choice, she made an impossible choice of her own, to reveal her true identity and risk everything for the possibility of genuine alliance." My sisters exchanged glances, clearly having learned this information during their own briefings. "So the whole scenario," I began, "was designed to test human nature under pressure, yes. We needed to understand your species' decision-making process before committing to alliance." Vaelthon's golden eyes met mine directly. "What we discovered exceeded our most optimistic projections." The garden chamber occupied the station's central hub, its transparent dome providing a 360-degree view of the stars. Alien flora from a dozen worlds created an ecosystem that shouldn't have been possible. Crystalline trees from the outer rim growing beside Earth roses, while bioluminescent vines from the Delta sector wound through the canopy overhead. At the garden's heart stood Zara, and the sight of her stole my breath, just as it had that first night in our cell. She wore traditional Zephyrian wedding attire, armor crafted from what looked like captured starlight, her white hair adorned with crystals that caught and refracted the dome's cosmic view. But it was her expression that held me frozen, equal parts nervousness and joy, vulnerability and strength. Adrian, she said as I approached, her accent making my name sound like music. Are you certain about this? Once we complete the ceremony, there's no precedent for how our children will be received by either of our peoples. I took her hands in mine, feeling the familiar warmth of her skin through the ceremonial gloves. You mean our blue-skinned, golden-eyed, impossibly stubborn children who will probably drive both our governments crazy? Her laugh was like silver bells in the starlight. Precisely those children. I can't wait to meet them. The ceremony itself blended traditions from both our worlds. Human vows spoken under alien stars, Zephyrian rituals that bound not just individuals but entire bloodlines. Captain Jorik served as Velthon's representative, while Elena and Arya stood as my family witnesses. But the moment that would be remembered in both our histories came when Zara removed her ceremonial dagger and offered it to me, handle first. In accepting this blade, she said formally, you accept the responsibility to choose not just for yourself, but for all those who will follow in our footsteps. I took the weapon, the same design as the one Velthon had held to Elena's throat so many months ago, and felt its weight settle into my palm. And in accepting it, I replied, following the script we'd rehearsed, but feeling the words resonate with deeper meaning, I choose to protect all those under my care or die in the attempt. Then let no one say we chose poorly, Zara said, her voice thick with emotion. Never, I agreed and kissed my alien princess as the stars wheeled overhead. Later, as the celebration moved to the main hall and diplomats from a dozen species offered congratulations on the new alliance, I found myself once again on the observation deck. But this time I wasn't alone. Zara stood beside me, her armor exchanged for more comfortable robes, her hand warm in mine. Any regrets? I asked. Only that it took a crisis to bring us together. She leaned against my shoulder, her presence a comfort that transcended species barriers. Though I suppose the best alliances are forged under pressure. Personal and political. Both. She lifted her head to study my face in the starlight. Adrian, when you refused to choose between your sisters, you showed us something we'd never seen before. A species willing to sacrifice everything for those they protect. But when you chose me despite learning I deceived you, you showed me something even more precious. Which was that love doesn't require perfection, only truth, and the courage to build something better from whatever mistakes we've made. I kissed her again, tasting starlight and promise, while beneath us, two worlds turned toward a future neither could have imagined alone. And for the first time since that terrible moment in the throne room, I knew with absolute certainty that we had chosen well. The blade that had once threatened to divide us had become the foundation of something unprecedented. Not just peace between our peoples, but hope for what they might become together.